Hi everyone, welcome to Angie Space. If you're new to my channel, my name's Angela and thank you for taking the time to drop by. I want to make this video on parenting and it's based upon the story about the prodigal child. Many of us grew up being told this story in church. If you grew up from a Christian home, you would probably have heard about the prodigal child. And a lot of the times, um, our parents would use this story of this child who left home, who misbehaved, who got into so many troubles, to remind us not to behave the same way. And sometimes they would use it to judge us as children as well when we behave unruly, when we go wayward, um, just going against their rules and regulation. And a child who would go the wrong way in society would be known or referred to as the prodigal child and will be called all sorts of names. This child would be scapegoated probably for the rest of their lives. There would be no encouragement for the child. There would be no advice. Most of the times you would hear a lot of parents. I come from an African background, so you'd hear a lot of African parents, especially Nigerian parents, curse their child rather than pray for their child. They would call them names. Sometimes you'd hear classic things like useless child, you wayward child, you would never amount to anything, no good will ever come of you, you're a disgrace to the family. And then you'd hear people calling them a prodigal child. This is a big norm in a lot of African homes when a child is not presenting themselves in the way they're supposed to or in the way that the parents expect that child to portray or present themselves in the family and in society. Now, the one thing that our parents love doing is every time using this quote from the Bible that says, children obey your parents, and children honor your father and your mother so your days may be long. And there is nothing wrong with those quotes. However, there is one aspect that that quote focused on, and where it says specifically, children obey your parents in the Lord. In the Lord means that your parents have to be walking according to God's will, according to God's ordination, according to God's commandments. They can't be criminals and expect you to obey them. If your parents are hardened criminals or drug addicts and they ask you to do something that is going against God's laws, God's will, children are not expected to obey them. And this is why it's stated clearly, children obey your parents in the Lord. They have to be walking after God's ways. Now, the second quote that says, honor your father and your mother so your days may be long. This still goes in line with parents behaving accordingly, walking in God's ways. If your parents are not honoring God, how do they expect you to honor them? We learn from our parents. We learn from their characters. We learn from what they've done in life, their experience in life, how they handle situations. And this is why the writer of Proverbs says, you should bring up your children in the ways of the Lord, or in the ways that they should be brought up, so that when they grow up, they will not depart from it. But how many parents bring up their children that way? How many parents behave themselves calmly? How many parents behave the way they are supposed to according to God's will and commandment? When Jesus Christ gave that parable about the prodigal child, it tells you of a loving father who had two sons. One son was obedient, did as he was told, worked in the fields, helped the father look after the farm and everything else that needed to be done. The other child was spoiled, self-centered, selfish, only cared about himself and the fact that he was from a wealthy family. Now, that child asking his father for inheritance whilst the father was still alive is a big insult and an abomination in Hebrew and Jewish culture. In the past, a child like that would have probably been stoned to death. But this is where we have grace with Christ. This is where we have grace with Jesus Christ. Everybody focused on the prodigal child leaving home, getting his inheritance, going away to live his life in a stupid, selfish way, and getting involved with people who didn't care about him. He ended up working in a pig's farm, didn't have anywhere to sleep, and now having to feed from the same place the pigs were feeding from. And this child realized eventually that he had a home. He had a father who loved him, a father who loved him so much, gave him his inheritance even whilst he was still alive. This prodigal child remembered that even the house help, maybe the slaves or hand help in his father's house were treated better than he was. And he came to himself. He realized his wrong and went home. One thing our parents have failed to understand in this parable is this. They focused so much only on the prodigal child, but didn't focus on the father of the prodigal child. They didn't focus because they didn't want to. Now, I'll tell you one thing that I noticed from the father of the prodigal child as an African woman. That father never cursed his child. Even when his son asked for his inheritance before his time, there was nowhere written in the scriptures that the prodigal child's father cursed him, wished him bad, called him a useless child, called him insubordinate, said he would never succeed in life, or bad things would happen to him and he would regret it. Nowhere was this evident in the scriptures. Rather, the father was sorrowful. He was sad that his child wanted to live this type of life. And he hoped that one day he would come back home. When the prodigal's child father saw his son coming from afar, the father didn't wait for the son to come to him, go on his knees and start begging for forgiveness. This father was so happy to see that his child realized himself that he ran to meet his child and hugged him. And this was when the son begged for forgiveness. And even after this, the father was so happy that his child came back home. He asked for the fattest cow to be killed in celebration of his lost son that returned back home. One thing I want us to focus on this is the father's behavior, his character towards his unruly child, towards his ungrateful child. This father showed love. This father showed genuine sadness. This father did not carry bitterness in his heart when his child behaved the way he did. This father had hope that his child would change and come home. And this father was patient and understanding, and most likely prayed for his son to come home. This was what was revealed in scripture that we as parents or our parents failed to realize. When you have a child that is going through different stages in life, there is nothing wrong in telling of your child, but we need to be careful the words that we use on our kids because words are very powerful. We are not to curse our children. We are not to wish them bad. We are to advise them and admonish them when they do wrong things. And we are to pray for them and hope and believe that God will turn that child's heart back to Him. This is what I wanted to say. We as parents need to do better. And we need to stop condemning our children who do not behave the way we wish them to behave. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. Have a blessed day.